Welcome, Catherine, to 2020's edition of A Sister's Story. You are our second one for this decade, so thank you for your long ride in from Detroit that we will spend together. Now, you are known now as Catherine DeClercq, but you were formerly Sister Catherine Camille. Correct?
Yes.
How did you get the name Catherine Camille?
Right. Well, first of all, Peg, I want to thank you for your leadership in doing this for us. Okay, my name. In talking about my parents, my mother is Meredith Catherine
Catherine.
DeClercq. My dad is Jerome Camille DeClercq, so I have my parents' second names.
Oh, that
Camille.
is neat.
That's how I got Catherine Camille. That's my baptismal name. And when we were given names at profession, and I knelt before Mother Gerald, she gave me my name, and I was so shocked. She said, "Do I have the right person?" I said, "Oh, yes, thank you, Mother."
Did you ask for that?
It was a third choice because I didn't think I had a chance of getting it. So it was a blessing. My mom was extremely grateful. So it was a blessing.
Okay, so we have 30 minutes to get your entire life in here. So let's start with a little background about your family history, your mother and dad, and your family life, your siblings.
Okay. Well, I have a twin brother. We were born March 21, and interesting, part of our lives was a fun time growing up with Tom. I had no other siblings, and so, he played with his trucks and I played with my dolls or whatever, until we got to high school. But my parents met in Chicago, where they had both finished college and were living in the same apartment. And my mom was living with her two sisters, an older one and a younger one. And when my mom and dad married, my dad's hometown is South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, okay.
So a little bit of history there about Notre Dame, because my parents were married at Notre Dame, because father lived just a mile from the campus. So we were baptized there, and my father was buried my parents are buried at Notre Dame at the cemetery. Yes, so there's a long history there.
How do you get to be buried at Notre Dame?
Well, he's
unless
from
you've been a
Notre Dame.
football
He's
player.
from South Bend, and he was a class of 28 at Notre
Okay.
Dame. So
Okay.
that's how it is.
That's interesting. Both your parents were at college.
Yes, both went. Dad went to Notre Dame, and my mom went to the American College of Physical Education, which eventually became DePaul.
Oh, okay.
And my mother wanted to have her prenatal care in South Bend with a family physician that they knew, and so it just so happened that when they came from Chicago down in February of that year, she was pregnant with twins, and we were breech babies, born feet first, which is, of course, at that 80-some years ago it still is a very risky thing. I was born first, but my brother was much thinner. We were 11 pounds together, 5 and 6 pounds each. All through life, it was, we go to the dentist, go to wherever. Who comes first? Well, ladies first, my brother would say.
That was his
so he was
motto.
always very kind about that. He never seemed to be bothered about that. So from there, then my parents went back, and we lived in Chicago on the South Side. I went to St. Carthage to first and second grade. Dad was in the food business, but it was, so he was not drafted. It was World War II, because everybody in this country needed to eat. And so because he was in food, he was not drafted. And he worked not on the grocery side of business. It was a company, I think, called Standard Brands, which was kind of common food. But I knew it as he did the restaurant and bakery side of it, where Fleischmann yeast, Jason Sanborn coffee, so forth. And so he was changed then, first and second grade in Chicago at St. Carthage, and we moved to Cleveland, where he was a district manager in that Cleveland area. Went to St. Rose School, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and then he was transferred to Detroit. And that's how we got to Royal Oak, Michigan.
Okay.
Right. And of course, in the Detroit area, he knew all the Fred Sanders, the Ori Bakeries, the Fred Myers of Myers. He was very much involved in that kind of food. Now, an interesting part about it is my mom even worked a bit while we were young. Her cousin came to live with us till we were about 5 she didn't have much of an education. Mom was born in Nome, North Dakota, lived in Fargo. So she's a German background.
Right,
And whereas I said Dad was born and raised in South Bend, which is a strong Belgian background. And so his parents, Grandma came from Belgium, age 2, but his father lived right in Mishawaka, India, which is strong Belgian. So when they came together, of course, Mom didn't have a strong Catholic background. She was Lutheran until she was about 12.
Okay.
So she fell into this whole Notre Dame thing, the super Catholic kind of dynamic. But she did manage to bring her cousin, help her get her high school degree. My dad, I can still see him sitting there studying with Florence. And then Mom taught a couple days a week down at DePaul and in the Chicago Park system. When we got to Cleveland, she did not teach. She stayed home, with us. And then when we got to the Detroit area, she started, after we got to high school, she started teaching down at Visitation.
Oh, really?
She taught out at Holy Name in Birmingham. She taught at Shrine of the Little Flower. So she taught elementary school and high school. So many of our sisters remember my mom because she loved to teach the little kids, and they loved to go to gym class.
Mm-hmm.
So
Because she was a PE teacher.
physical ed.
Physical
Right.
ed.
So a little bit ahead of her time because she was
Right.
always saying, when she taught in high school, that she'd get with the men coaches because the girls always got the leftover basketballs, leftover whatever. And she started to speak up and say, these young women need to have everything as much as these young men do, etc. So she had her favorites in the coaches. I remember her talking about that. The other thing she did, which I found interesting, was that she often had a class for women in the evenings. She'd meet teachers and so
Way
forth.
ahead
They'd
of
say,
her time.
we want to educate. We want to have some exercise. So she'd rent a place like a gym or something, and they'd go for an hour. The other thing, she always wanted a musician to be with her. And when she was teaching even little children, she thought music always helped them get better sense of rhythm, better sense of exercise. So I think she probably was doing Pilates before they were ever heard about or fashionable or whatever. So that's a little bit of history about that.
So where did you get your music
Music
DNA?
came because my mom's older sister was involved in music, and in Cleveland I took piano lessons,
Got it,
and it was
okay.
sort of something else for me to do. My brother was a server, he delivered newspapers, did things like that. So that's how I got into music. And that's all through high school I played. Sister Grace Esther was my music teacher.
And you were at St. Mary's in Royal
St.
Oak
Mary's,
all
correct.
the way up to high school, through high
Right.
school.
But if we go into the music side of it, because I could play decently, I was not a great musician. And it was a wonderful learning experience for me. So I went to Siena for 2 years from high school, got a scholarship.
So you did not enter right after high school?
No, 2 years. Went to Siena for 2 years and did my music. And then, of course, entered and managed to finish my degree in music here at Siena and graduate with my class. Entered in 56, but I started college in 54, but finished with my class in 58. And then went into education. I spent then 3 summers in education.
Let's go back to you wanted to become a sister, the Adrian Dominicans. Now you were taught, we were at St. Mary's in Royal Oak, correct?
Right, that's
The
where I went to
Adrian
high
Dominican.
school.
Okay. So what was, how did you get excited about being a nun, or whether or not you were excited?
Wherever I was, I had the Adrian Dominicans in Chicago for 2 years, the Sisters of St. Joseph of St. Rose in Cleveland,
Okay,
and then the Adrian Dominicans from 6th grade through 12th.
okay.
My brother did not go to the parish high school. My brother went to the Jesuit school, UD High.
Oh,
So that's where we parted ways and kind of found our own, kind of niche.
and how was that?
It was good. Well, I got teased a lot because my brother would come home and he didn't know what his homework was, And of course, I was looking out for him all through life. I mean, I took care of Tom. Some people say I'm still doing that, but anyway, so that was wonderful because then he really blossomed on his own at U of D. My vocation, I think, I didn't realize where it came from, but it was from, I dearly loved my grandmother on my father's side. I used to spend time there in the summers, etc. Went to church with her, the deeply Belgian Catholic family, There was something about the simplicity of her life. And as I reflected on my childhood, it was a fun, easy childhood, but it was very simple. You know, we didn't take any big trips or anything. I think the biggest trip was to go take the boat across Lake Michigan and go to Fargo, North Dakota to see where my mother came from, you know, because we'd gone to South Bend umpteen times from Chicago, etc. So I think my vocation came really from the goodness of my mother's mother, too, was a fun-loving, dear woman. And then just my admiration for the sisters. There was something there that still small voice somehow said to me that's what I wanted to do.
Anyone in particular, as you look back?
Well, Sister Grace Esther, who had music lessons, because that's where you had the chance to talk one-on-one in addition to doing it, unlike in a classroom situation or wherever. So that I would say that she was a low-keyed, no pressure, but she listened. She was a very good listener. And I think that enabled me to kind of focus. I knew when I left high school, in fact, my mother said to me, if you want to be a sister, that's fine, but I want you to be mature, so therefore I want you to go to college for at least 2 years. Well, so...
That's how we got to, that's what happened when we didn't go to college, huh?
That's
we
right.
just entered.
Whatever. So...
Wise woman.
Yes.
She was way ahead of herself, wasn't she?
Yes, she was ahead of her time. Then in terms of education, then, when I finished my 3 summers at Siena, you know, going to summer school, I got this little card to go to the University of Michigan.
Wow.
So I went over, but you take preliminary exams at the University of Michigan when you enter the school, and I learned I was 10 hours deficient. I did not have enough theory. I just did not have enough historical background in music. You know, Siena knew I was going to be a teacher, I think, so therefore they didn't push. So I had to, it was, summer school there was 6 years of 8 weeks. And also, you had to do 2 instruments. So, of course, I played the piano, and then I had never had a voice lesson, but I took voice just to be able to carry a tune and carry. It was a very humbling experience, a very tough experience, a lot of anxiety. I never entered my mind to say to anybody, this is not my gift. I'm working way too hard. I mean, I went to U of M with Magdalena. Now, Magdalena was in performance. It was nothing for her. She could, you know, I practiced 5 hours and barely get by the jury because you had to play a jury just in front of professors, etc.
So that was a true challenge for you back then.
It was really humbling and filled with anxiety, a lot of stress, you know. But anyway, I finished and I taught for 12 years. I mean, during that time I was teaching elementary school, and in high school I could teach a choral group. And of course I was lucky in one way because I was at Hoban Dominican with Sister Mary Louise Wald and Sister Mary Peter, and so we had an orchestra, and you know I did productions, etc. So I think I was fairly successful.
You know you were successful.
But
stressful.
By the end of one of the years, my years at St. Paul's, I was 6 years there, I was really depressed because it was not giving me life. You know, it was not giving me the energy, and so God intervened, and I was elected a co-provincial. And that's where my administrative skills surfaced.
Yes.
Because at that point, as we got on a team of 5 people, the co-provincial team, and you know we had consultants that came in one group, one consultant finished, you know, some kind of a little test or whatever, said, you know, she's an administrator by detail. I think you should let her do it because it would make your lives a lot easier, because none of us had handled master calendars, and you know,
no, we didn't have all the technology.
And we were all in different geographic things coming. So that's how we got into my also realizing, you know, the procedures handbook. We didn't have any procedures. I mean, because we just answered what the superior said to do. Well, when we got freed up after Vatican II, so to speak, we were all trying to figure out what's the best way to do things. So that was the kind of the genesis of the procedures handbook. And from that experience, it was 2-year term, elected, re-elected, so it was 4 years. When I was finishing that was Rosemary Ferguson, that knew that they needed an administrative type person at LCWR, the national office in Washington.
Okay.
And she approached me and she said, and I of course had, I'd really been in New York for 2 years, Swanton for 2 years, Cleveland for 2 years, and St. Paul's Grosse Pointe for 6 years. So that was my 12 years of teaching. So I really hadn't been much out of the Midwest. So I went and interviewed for that position, and of course I was hired. So I was at LCWR in Washington for 4 years. That was a very broadening experience
I
for
bet.
me. It was
Did you travel to Europe with them?
No,
Okay.
at that time we didn't go.
Okay.
The apostolic delegate used to come, and we'd send things to Europe with the pouch that he mailed, a special way, overnight mail. But we were next door to the bishop's offices. We used to go over there for Mass, and it was the mission office was there. It was a wonderful exposure to a broader community of people. So that was just very enriching. And of course, from that position then, I was elected to the General Council in 78. So I was in Washington from 74 to 78.
Okay.
Co-provincial from 70 to 74. 74 to 78 in Washington, and then elected to the General Council. And of course, I wept when we had the installation.
But none of this was as stressful as the music situation.
I let go of the music.
Yeah,
I've
that
hardly
was
gone
good.
back to touch it.
There was never a time you thought, oh, this is stressful, I'm going back to the...
No.
Good.
Even today, people will tease me about it, and it's like I have no desire. It's like that. It's not my gift. I worked hard to be. It's like
Right.
I worked hard to be obedient, I guess.
Yeah, right. Well, we were asked to do things that was unbelievable. We went and taught places. We didn't know how to teach. We couldn't do high school. I mean, we never been in high school except when we went to high school. So really, the gift of the Spirit was there, but to be able to speak up although you didn't speak up, all of a sudden, the Lord spoke up for you, the Holy Spirit.
Up.
Yeah.
That's right. I've been grateful ever since.
Yeah.
So
what would you advise someone nowadays, in this day and age, if they were in something that was...
Well, to get the support you need to own your gifts.
Good.
To identify them, and to own them, and to become free inside of yourself.
Right.
To not be ashamed to say, this isn't for me.
Right.
It's a tough one to do. I know. It's not easy to.
But to know yourself, because no one knows you like you know yourself.
Exactly.
And you have to be honest with that.
But remember, we didn't do a whole lot of getting to know ourselves.
No, that's for sure.
At that point.
Well, you did. You went to college for 2 years, so you were more mature than the rest of us.
That's right, Peg. That's right. No, but it was an experience that is different. So where are we now? So we're in the leadership.
Yeah.
With the first council was, with Carol and Barb and Carol Jean and Nadine.
Right.
Very enriching experience.
Oh, God, yeah.
Just very enriching. And of course, that's where we started with the mission groups, the new governance structure, and Carol Jean, the dynamo that was trying to get
Carol
us...
Jean McDonald.
That's right, trying to get us organized and moved along. And of course, Jean Burns was the one who identified the role in the Council of Administrator. Because at that time, we were about 1,800 of us. And of course, we still had all of our institutions, et cetera,
Right.
and they were separately incorporated, and there was a whole lot to learn. And I think she realized, so it was really interesting now because I'm speaking to you right after we're projecting where we're going to be in 2022, and that we no longer need to identify that administrative role in the General Council specifically. Understandable.
Right,
That was 42 years ago.
Right.
It was a different era, different time. And it seemed to be the right thing at the moment, and therefore we greatly expanded the procedures handbook. That became part of our statutes actually, eventually. So, and then of course we got into the Constitution developing after so then that was only 4 years, so that was again, it goes fast in that kind of thing, but elected in 78 to 82, then 82 to 86. And that's where we dealt a lot with the Constitution, and the government structure really did come together. But it was new to have, we call them provincials, co-provincials, then chapter priorises came into being, learning how to be a leadership council, a broader base, and we had a lot of consulting work that was done to help all of us, learn how to govern more collaboratively versus the superior
But
dynamic.
after that role of leadership in the congregation, and you left that, can you tell us about a couple other places,
Well-
experiences that you've had that were perhaps very transformative? Seems like everything was transformative
Everything
for
is
you.
transformative.
That's
I'm
good.
very grateful for all of it. Well, during my time in leadership, I flew out to the hospitals. I was on the board of the hospitals and was the corporate member, identifying, and I remember them asking me, what does Adrian want? And I had no background in healthcare. Remember, I had been taught for 12 years, then I'd been in
Right.
administration. So I came to the Sisters of Mercy because when I was at LCWR in Washington, Sister Concilia Moran was the president of the Sisters of Mercy, and she was of great help. So she said, well, come to Farmington Hills and, talk to Ed Connors, and, So I did, and they were extremely helpful. Flew out even to Nevada and to California to talk to them because our hospitals were small, individual hospitals, and in my mind at that time I knew there was not a huge, long future for them as standalone small hospitals. So the Sisters of Mercy in Burlingame, California, and the ones up in Auburn, California, were going to bring their two hospitals together, and they said, well, the Adrians can come and join us as soon as we get our act together and form the system. Because in Farmington Hills, the Sisters of Mercy Health Corporation was formed in 1976. They were one of the first Catholic health systems in the country. So they knew what to do. So they were enormously helpful. But of course, the people in California did not want to have the people from Midwest out there telling them what to do. So they formed Catholic Health Care West.
Okay.
Remember that. So
Yeah.
our hospitals became a part of that with the Sisters of Mercy in the West.
Correct.
So that happened right about in 1986, because Linda Bevilacqua followed me and she picked up on that whole dynamic. So Ed Connors and Sister Concilia said, what are you going to do when you leave leadership? I said, well, I really don't know. I'll take a sabbatical and figure out what God has in mind for the next step. They said, come and do a fellowship with us.
But did you take a sabbatical? That's a very important
6
question.
months. Wonderful pay, 6 months. So now that I think about it, but that's what I thought I should do.
Right.
So I did. And so then January.
What did you do during that sabbatical? That was
I
totally...
took a course in ethics.
So you were.
I think I didn't take the course. I think I audited an audit.
Did you
of
have
it.
fun?
But, I had to move. I had to find a place to live. And so I went into an apartment complex where a couple of our Adrian sisters were living in Southfield, Michigan. And so, yeah, it was fascinating. So what I went to Farmington Hills then with Ed and Sister Concilia, and that was January 1 of 87. And the rest is history, as they say. I
Yeah.
then spent 30 years
That's
in
unbelievable.
different aspects
Yeah.
of Catholic healthcare. Because after about 4 months, the woman that was handling the governance side of it left to get married. And so Ed said, would you just, pick this up? Well, of course, I understood the religious life side of it, the sponsorship side of it. And I'd been on boards, because I'd been on Sienna's board, on Barry's board, and the hospital board, so I did understand board works. So I became Ed's assistant, and as everybody says, the rest is history. So I stayed and became assistant to the president, really working with the Sisters of Mercy in the Detroit province. And then it was in the 90s, they realized their numbers were shrinking, and they would no longer probably be able to handle sponsorship of their hospital. So there was 20 hospitals. Today there are 93.
Oh, my.
But so I stayed then for Ed till he retired, and then the next woman came, Judy Pelham.
Right.
And so they all, kind of relied on me to be that continuity, the thread. In the late 90s, when the Sisters of Mercy said, we need to start working on what our future will be with a public juridic person that's other than the religious congregation. Don't the Holy Cross Sisters from Notre Dame call? The superior there calls the superior and said, let's do this together. So the Mercies waited 6 months for the Holy Cross Sisters to get their congregation to say, yes, we're going to do this. So I helped develop statutes and the bylaws, everything that went to Rome to create the new public juridic person to sponsor.
For those that are watching this, who might not be familiar with this public juridic person, can you just explain that a little bit
Quickly.
briefly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Every religious congregation is a public juridic person, which
Okay.
is a corporation in the church.
Corporation, okay.
That's the simplest way to explain it. But within religious life, of course, that's almost always been the superior and her general council. They become the members of that corporation, of that public juridic person. So to say that laypersons could assume that responsibility was something new.
Right.
But Rome had begun to understand that the shift that already, was occurring. So we had to create different statutes and bylaws because it was no longer related to religious life. And so then we had to identify laypersons to assume that role. And Rome, I give them some credit for this, saying, sisters have known what to do. It's just sort of been in our DNA to pick it up and learn. So we had to have a formation program. And so within the Detroit province, et cetera, I got a pilot group together of 15 laypersons, sisters and laypersons, because some sisters had never been in congregation leadership. They didn't understand that role either. So we brought in theologians and scholars and studied canon law, studied theology, etc. At the same time we were doing that, there are other Catholic systems doing the same thing who approached me and said, Catherine, we should be doing this together. Every little group shouldn't be, creating.
Yeah.
So I started the collaborative formation program for public juridic persons. There were 6 groups, the Sisters of Providence in California, Mercy Sisters eventually moved to Omaha, the Cincinnati Mercies, the Catholic Health East, the Bon Secours Sisters. We all came together and formed a collaborative formation program that met 4 weekends over about 18 months. And we met in Chicago so people could fly in. I think it was the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, now that I think about it. It was not the Mercies there. It was the Detroit Mercies, yes. Eventually we ended up with 13 different religious congregations involved that were moving their sponsorship, much as our congregation now has moved to the new public juridic person by our collaborating with Catholic Healthcare West and Catholic Health Initiatives.
Which is all of that.
Yeah. It gets complicated, but
It is, and it's very much a part of who you are. But we know you've been about initiating and the leadership that you've had in the whole healthcare system.
Right.
Now, you just recently withdrew from what you were involved in.
right.
How did you make that decision? After how many years were you in that system? 30-some, did you say?
30 years.
Yes.
It was exactly 30 years.
So, how did you make that decision?
All of a sudden, I thought I still had good health and good energy, and I still felt I was contributing.
Right.
But all of a sudden, your energy starts to wane,
Right.
and it was time to move the collaborative formation work to the Catholic Health Association to make it even broader than what the 6 groups that we had, because I was the coordinator, again, I was the coordinator of that whole group with the faculty and the participants, etc. And so when that happened, it was like a relief for me. It's going into the right hands. I can let go of it easily. We were making another transition in leadership. I served actually 6 different presidents in those 30 years, because they'd come and they'd retire, and then we'd have interims, etc. So I just knew in my heart that it was right, and it proved to be. We always did the executive level, because eventually, they maybe. The titles didn't matter. I kept saying, I don't care what the title is. I'm vice president, executive vice president, etc.
For you.
Because you had to be at the leadership table to know what was going on, to deal with the agendas that surfaced at the board meeting and the follow-up, because you had to have 2 separate meetings with your public juridic person as well as your civil board. So that's how it gets complicated. So I just knew in my heart that the time was right.
So
What a
you make
blessing.
that decision, and you make it. And it's all of that experience and all that involvement, very heavy involvement you've had your whole religious life. How do you just say, go home and be quiet?
Well, you know, the other thing is it's very hard for people. They say, now what are you going to do when you retire? I say,
Right.
nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because we always have to be doing something. So I have found it very, very enriching. First of all, I had to move, so that was a focus to get myself into a smaller situation and a place where I wouldn't be so isolated in my living. So I moved into one of the Trinity House senior housing apartments so that I could be, you know, engaged with people. But at the same time, you know, Pat Seaman had asked me to do something related to Barry, which I did, so that kept me engaged for about 4 or 5 months. And then she asked me to go on the planning committee for our Encuentro last July, so that, you know, monthly meeting, so that kept going. And then, of course, I had never been a mission group delegate, so everybody turned to me and said, "Oh, Catherine, it's your turn," you know.
Yeah, it's about time.
It's about time.
You all had good excuses.
So I went to my first mission council meeting, and they, "You've never been to?" Yeah, no, I've never been to a mission council meeting. So it's wonderful. I mean, but I've been able to respond to things with a lot of gratitude, but a lot of ease. A lot.
What do you do for fun?
Well, first of all, I love to read, and I'm reading
What are
in a
you-
much greater depth than I
What
ever
are you
did.
reading right now?
Well, I just finished reading the book that's going to be in here at Weber, The Sin of White Supremacy. So, and I just handed it to Annalise last night when we were meeting so that she could read it because she'll be here on the 29th. And, you know, our whole commitment in the chapter to racism and to kind of know what's undergirding the whole struggle that we're having right now. So that's a book I just finished yesterday and handed it off to somebody else that I knew would appreciate the theology that's in it. So reading some good theology books, which I never had really the time to do in any kind of depth, has been really important. And then, of course, I do exercise. I think
still
I
go to
don't fall
curves?
far from the tree in that relationship because
Because your mom,
of my mom. I've gone to curves for women
right?
for about 17 years. And I go faithfully 3 or 4 times a week.
Good for you.
And
Even when you were so busy.
even when I was busy, I
'Cause
went
they're
in the
all over.
evenings usually when I was working because I was sitting all day. And I had some sciatic nerve problem, which has led to some more nerve problems. But actually, that's been a real blessing. And I was thinking, you know, a couple months ago, well, I didn't fall far from the tree on this one with my mom in terms of the exercise.
And you have nieces and nephews too. Do you get to see them very often?
I had
niece.
3. One was killed in a tragic
Right.
motorcycle accident at age 21. I have a niece that lives not too far from me in Grand Blanc.
Because they may be watching this, you know, because it's going to be on YouTube.
Right. My niece in Grand Blanc has 3 wonderful children,
Okay.
Bryce, Zachary, and Lauren, and I enjoy them tremendously and see them, you know, fairly frequently, and we do stay in touch. My nephew was 30 years military, Navy, and he has one son who, and they've just moved from Virginia now to be in the Phoenix area where his only son is living, and his only son is in Homeland Security and has adopted 4 children, and they have 3 of their own. And so, God bless Paul and his wife Terry, they have moved to be in Phoenix to be grandparents, to be really supportive of these wonderful 7 children.
Wow.
It's a blessing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
As we conclude in your message to us, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to share with us that we could perhaps ponder, that you've received in your varied experiences?
Well, I think there's a mission statement that we had that I've kind of taken to myself that in life, our presence, no matter where we are, is to be a transforming, healing presence, and especially now in our broken world. And I do think how we express our love and kindness to one another, how we learn how to be merciful and forgive, we can't do enough of that. And I know I've been told by people that I have had a capacity to work with challenging people, to be forgiving and to be kind and to kind of draw them their best selves forward, because I think that's what happened with me when Rosemary called me to go to do something that I never in my wildest dreams had thought about. When you answer that kind of call and you draw that forth in people, because there's a scripture, little phrase in Lamentations, that the kindnesses of the Lord are renewed every morning. And I do believe that that is our call, to be kind and loving and merciful. I also love St. Dominic's thing, his heritage, charity, love for one another. Guard humility, who we are is a gift from God every day, and the gifts we have and how we use them. And build our heritage out of voluntary poverty, to just be who we are, as simple as we can be. So I think what I learned from the Summers experience and assemblies and so forth, we really do love one another. And while we're human and we have our own interactions, I think basically for the most part we are loving and kind, and that's what we should bring to our broken world. That kindness and love.
Well, thank you, Catherine Camille DeClercq, for sharing your abundant life with us. And in the name of the congregation, I particularly want to express our gratitude for all the service that you have given to so many in our world, but particularly to us as a congregation for these 60-plus years. And your sharing today, I've learned lots about you that I didn't know. I think we think of each other in a certain pattern, and that's it, but you kind of digressed and gave us a little bit more of yourself, and for that I'm grateful. So thank you again, and may you continue to enjoy the next 10 or 20 years. Are you going to be around for 2030, 2040?
I don't know. I think that's in God's hands.
Okay. Thank you.
And
thank you,
Peg.
Catherine.